It was a bright afternoon when the heavy glass doors of the restaurant slowly opened. The sound of heels clicking against the polished marble floor caught everyone's attention. Heads turned, conversations softened, and eyes followed the woman who had just entered. She was dressed in a long designer coat, shining earrings, and carried a handbag that alone could pay a waitress's monthly salary. Her perfume spread in the air, expensive and overpowering, demanding notice before she even spoke a word. The woman's face carried the expression of someone who believed she owned the world. She walked in with slow, proud steps, pausing only to glance at the tables and the people sitting there. She did not smile. Instead, her lips curled as if nothing around her was worth her presence. A couple seated near the entrance whispered to each other. They could see how her eyes scanned the room, not with warmth, but with judgment. To her, everyone seemed ordinary, perhaps even unworthy of sharing the same space with her. She chose a table near the window, not because she wanted the view, but because she wanted to be seen. She pulled the chair slightly and sat down with the grace of someone who is used to being served. Her fingers tapped the table impatiently, as if waiting for the world to notice her. And soon enough, the waitress arrived. The waitress was young, but carried herself with quiet strength. Her uniform was neatly ironed, though a little faded from constant washing. She wore a smile, not forced, but gentle, the kind of smile that made customers feel welcome. She carried a small notepad in her hand, ready to take the woman's order. "Good afternoon, ma'am. Welcome. May I offer you something to drink while you decide?" She said softly, but the woman barely looked at her. Instead, she raised her chin and gave a long stare that carried more judgment than words ever could. After a pause, she replied in a sharp voice, "Water. Make sure it's cold, not tap water bottled. And hurry. I don't have all day." The waitress nodded politely, not showing any sign of irritation. She turned to leave, but the woman continued speaking loudly, as if wanting everyone around to hear. These places claim to be luxurious, but sometimes the staff ruins the atmosphere. I hope service here matches the price on the menu. A small laugh followed, and she picked up her phone, scrolling as though the world was unworthy of her full attention. When the waitress returned with the water, she placed it gently on the table. But the woman's eyes immediately focused on the glass. She lifted it slightly, tilted it, and then put it back down with a dramatic sigh. "This isn't cold enough," she said, her voice cutting like glass. "Do you people even understand what service means?" The waitress, still calm, bowed her head slightly. "I'm very sorry, ma'am. I'll bring you a colder one right away." She picked up the glass and walked away quickly, while the woman leaned back in her chair, clearly enjoying the attention her outburst created. A few diners exchanged looks, some shaking their heads, others whispering quietly. The woman, however, was completely comfortable. She opened her handbag, took out a small mirror, and adjusted her makeup. Every move of hers screamed arrogance, as if she lived in a world where everyone else existed only to serve her. She had not come here simply to eat. She had come to be seen, to be admired, and perhaps to remind herself that she was above everyone else. When the waitress returned again with another glass, the woman finally took a sip and gave a small nod. But her eyes soon went back to the waitress, scanning her from head to toe. She noticed the simple shoes, the tired hands, the worn uniform. And then, with a cruel smile, she asked loudly, "Do you enjoy working here? I suppose for someone like you, this must feel like a dream." Her words dripped with mockery, disguised as casual conversation. The waitress did not answer rudely. She simply nodded and said, "It's honest work, ma'am, and I'm grateful for it." She turned to leave again, but the woman chuckled under her breath. She made sure the laugh was loud enough for the nearby tables to hear, as if the very idea of someone being grateful for a waitress job was amusing to her. People sitting nearby began to feel uncomfortable. Some looked down at their plates, trying not to get involved, while others shook their heads slightly, disappointed by the woman's behavior. But the woman herself remained blind to all of it. She didn't notice the disapproval, or perhaps she didn't care. In her mind, she was the star of the room, and everyone else was background. Minutes passed, and the restaurant returned to its usual rhythm. But the image of the woman's entrance lingered. The way she walked, the way she sat, the way she treated the waitress, it all painted a picture of arrogance that many had seen before, but never in such sharp detail. She had come to eat, yes, but more than that. She had come to display her wealth and superiority, and yet, as the sunlight hit the restaurant windows and cast a golden glow across the room, nobody could guess the twist that was waiting for her. Nobody could imagine that the same waitress she insulted would soon make her freeze in shock. The proud entrance that she thought made her untouchable was only the beginning of a story she would never forget. The waitress returned with a soft smile, carrying the chilled water the woman had demanded. She placed the glass gently on the table, careful not to make a sound. But before she could even take a step back, the affluent woman gave her a long, hard look. Her eyes were sharp, almost as if she was searching for flaws. And then, with a voice loud enough for other diners to hear, she spoke words that cut deeper than the sharpest knife. "Tell me," the woman said slowly, her lips twisting into a mocking smile. "Do you actually enjoy this job? Serving tables, cleaning up after strangers, pretending to be polite when you'd rather be anywhere else?" She laughed lightly, shaking her head. "I can't imagine living such a small life." The restaurant grew quiet. A man at the corner table lowered his fork. A young couple who had been laughing moments ago went silent. Everyone could hear her voice, and they could feel the sting in her words. The waitress, however, did not flinch. She held her notepad close, her fingers pressing into it, but her smile remained gentle. She looked into the woman's eyes and replied softly, "It's honest work, ma'am. I take pride in serving people. Everyone deserves kindness when they sit at this table." For a brief second, something flickered in the woman's expression, perhaps surprise at the calm response. But it vanished as quickly as it came. She leaned back in her chair, waved her hand dismissively, and rolled her eyes. "Kindness," she scoffed. "Please. Kindness doesn't pay bills. Kindness doesn't buy diamonds." She tapped the large ring on her finger, making sure the light caught its shine. "This does. This is what matters in the world. Money, power, status, not kindness." Her words, sharp and heavy, floated through the room like poison. A little boy at a nearby table whispered to his mother, "Why is she being so mean?" The mother gently hushed him, giving him a look that said not to interfere. But the waitress heard it, and her heart softened at the boy's innocence. She simply bowed her head slightly and said, "I'll be back with your meal, ma'am." But as she turned to walk away, the woman's voice rang out again. "Wait," the woman said, her tone filled with arrogance. "Before you leave, answer me honestly. Do you ever dream of being someone else? Someone who doesn't have to serve drinks all day. Someone important." The waitress stopped in her tracks. She turned back, her face calm, her voice steady. "Ma'am, everyone is important. Titles and wealth don't decide a person's worth. Respect does." For the first time, the woman's smile faded. Her jaw tightened. She didn't like being challenged, especially not by someone she thought was beneath her. Her cheeks flushed slightly, but she quickly covered it up with another cruel laugh. "Respect," she said, almost spitting the word. "Respect is earned. And let me be clear, you won't get it serving food." Several guests looked at each other in disbelief. Some shook their heads. A few even muttered under their breath, calling her rude. But the woman didn't notice. Or maybe she noticed and simply didn't care. She was enjoying the scene she had created, relishing the silence that followed her insults. The waitress, meanwhile, took a small breath. She didn't argue further. She had learned long ago that some people carried walls around their hearts that no words could break. So instead, she simply nodded again and walked toward the kitchen. The woman watched her leave, her lips curling into a smirk. She thought she had won the exchange. To her, putting the waitress in her place felt like victory. She picked up her phone, sending a quick text to someone. Her laughter filling the air again. But around her, the atmosphere of the restaurant had changed. The cheerful hum of conversation had turned uneasy. People avoided looking directly at her, but they couldn't ignore the tension. It was as though her insults had cast a shadow across every table. The little boy from before whispered again to his mother, "She's not nice." His mother nodded quietly, patting his head, and gave a sympathetic smile toward the waitress as she disappeared into the kitchen. Inside the kitchen, the waitress stood still for a moment, closing her eyes and taking a deep breath. Her heart was steady, but she felt the sting not because she believed the woman's words, but because cruelty, when spoken aloud, had a way of cutting through even the strongest armor. She brushed it off quickly, reminding herself that dignity mattered more than the shallow opinions of strangers. Back in the dining area, the affluent woman leaned back in her chair with full confidence. She believed she had made her point. In her world, wealth was the only measure of success, and she wanted everyone around her to know it. But what she did not realize, what she could not even imagine, was that the very waitress she mocked held a secret that would soon shake her world. Her insults, her laughter, her pride, all of it would soon crumble. Because sometimes, life has a way of turning the tables when you least expect it, and in that restaurant, on that afternoon, the tables were about to turn in a way she would never forget. The restaurant had grown uneasy after the woman's sharp words, but she seemed blind to it. She sipped her water slowly, as if nothing had happened, scrolling on her phone and glancing at her reflection in the glass window beside her. She was satisfied with herself, believing she had shown her superiority. But around her, the air had shifted. Conversations that once filled the room with warmth now turned into hushed whispers. Guests leaned closer to each other, speaking softly so the woman wouldn't hear, but their eyes kept drifting toward her table. At one corner, an elderly couple exchanged worried looks. The husband shook his head and whispered, "Some people think money gives them the right to belittle others." That poor waitress didn't deserve such words. His wife sighed deeply, her gaze following the waitress as she moved quickly from table to table, still serving others with the same calm smile. As if the insults hadn't touched her, a young man sitting nearby leaned toward his friend. "You know that waitress?" he whispered. "She's been working here for years. I've seen her in this place since I was in college. She never complains, always polite, even when people treat her badly. She's one of the reasons I keep coming back here. People like her make this place feel special." His friend nodded in agreement, both of them glancing toward the woman with clear disapproval. On the opposite side of the room, a family was eating together. The little boy who had spoken earlier looked at his father again. "Dad, why did she say those mean things?" The father leaned close, his voice low but firm. "Because some people forget that respect is for everyone, no matter who they are. Remember this, son, how you treat those who serve you shows the kind of person you really are." The boy's eyes widened, absorbing the lesson. At another table, two women who seemed like regulars whispered while sipping their tea. One of them said, "Do you see the way she insulted that waitress? Unbelievable. If she only knew." She stopped herself suddenly, glancing toward the kitchen where the waitress had disappeared minutes ago. Her friend raised an eyebrow curiously. "If she only knew what?" The woman shook her head with a small, secretive smile. "Never mind. She'll find out soon enough." Meanwhile, the affluent woman noticed none of this. She sat tall and proud, convinced everyone admired her wealth and presence. She mistook the stolen glances for admiration rather than judgment. Every time someone's eyes landed on her, She thought they were impressed by her jewels or the elegance of her coat. She didn't realize that they were, in fact, waiting for her arrogance to meet its consequence. The waitress returned briefly, carrying plates for another table. Her smile remained, but her eyes looked heavier, as though the weight of the woman's words had not disappeared completely. Still, she moved gracefully, greeting each customer with warmth. Guests whispered even more now, their voices carrying quiet respect for her resilience. One man leaned across the table to his wife and said, "I've seen her work double shifts. She never asks for anything extra. Can you believe she's been serving here for nearly a decade? She practically keeps this place running." His wife nodded, looking at the arrogant woman's table with disdain. "And that lady has the nerve to insult her? She has no idea who she's talking to." In the far corner, a businessman quietly observed the scene. He was a regular customer too, and though he usually minded his own business, today he felt anger rise inside him. He whispered to himself, "It's always the same type, loud, proud, but blind. They think they're above everyone else. But respect is priceless." The murmurs grew like a soft wave flowing through the room. The whispers carried sympathy for the waitress, disapproval for the woman, and curiosity about what might come next. The restaurant seemed to hold its breath, as though everyone sensed something important was about to happen. The affluent woman, however, stayed wrapped in her own world. She looked at her watch impatiently, tapping her nails against the table. She didn't like waiting. She wanted her food quickly, her demands met instantly. She thought the silence around her was a sign of her power. She didn't realize she had become the subject of every whisper, every judging glance, every shaking head. The guests, though silent, were united in their thoughts. They felt the injustice, they saw the cruelty, and they waited with quiet hope that somehow the balance would shift. Because deep inside, everyone loves to see arrogance humbled. Everyone loves to see kindness win. The room held that tension like a string pulled tight, ready to snap. The whispers were not just words anymore. They were like sparks, spreading quietly, preparing for a fire that the affluent woman would never expect. She thought she had silenced the waitress with her insults. She thought she had shown the world that wealth meant power. But the world around her was watching, and though they said nothing to her face, they were all waiting for the truth she could not yet see, and very soon, that truth would walk out from the kitchen, and the woman's pride would turn into silence colder than the water she demanded. The restaurant grew quieter with every passing minute, as though the air itself was holding its breath. The affluent woman tapped her nails against the polished table, clearly irritated. She had finished her water and was now staring at the kitchen doors with impatience. Every few seconds, she would glance at her phone, then at her watch, and sigh dramatically, making sure everyone nearby could hear. Finally, when the waitress appeared again, carrying a tray toward another table, the woman lifted her hand and snapped her fingers sharply, like someone summoning a servant. The sound cut through the air, drawing a few shocked looks from the other guests. But the woman didn't care. She raised her voice, loud enough for half the restaurant to hear. "You there? Yes, you've a waitress." Her tone was commanding, filled with disdain. The waitress walked toward her table, still calm, her face carrying the same soft smile. "Yes, ma'am. How can I help you?" The woman leaned back in her chair, crossed her legs, and let out a mocking laugh. "This is unacceptable," she said. "The service here is slow, the food is late, and honestly, the atmosphere is ruined by staff who don't understand high-class customers." Her eyes narrowed as she looked at the waitress. "I want to speak to the owner. Right now. I'll make sure he knows how poorly this place is being run." Gasps echoed softly across the room. Some people exchanged glances. Others lowered their eyes, waiting for what would happen next. The waitress stood still for a moment, her expression calm and unreadable. Then she bowed her head slightly. "Of course, ma'am. I'll let the owner know you'd like to see him." The woman smirked triumphantly, as if she had won a battle. She adjusted her expensive coat, straightened her handbag on the table, and muttered just loudly enough for others to hear. Finally, "Maybe the owner will fire someone and fix this mess." As the waitress turned and walked toward the back, the whispers around the room grew louder. Guests leaned closer to one another, their words quick and urgent. "She's asking for the owner." One man whispered, "Oh, she has no idea. Doesn't she realize?" Another murmured, "No," came the reply, "and she's about to find out." The elderly couple at the corner table exchanged knowing smiles. They had been coming to this restaurant for years, and they knew the story well. They knew who the real owner was. They whispered to each other, "This is going to be interesting." Back at her table, the affluent woman sat straighter, imagining the scene she believed would unfold. In her mind, the owner would rush out, bow respectfully, and apologize for the terrible service. He would probably scold the waitress right there in front of everyone, maybe even fire her on the spot. The thought of it made the woman's lips curl into a satisfied smile. She pictured herself as the heroine of the story, the powerful customer who demanded respect and got it. But the restaurant's atmosphere told a different story. People weren't admiring her. They were waiting, watching, anticipating something she could not see. Their eyes flicked between the kitchen doors and the woman's proud posture. Even the soft music playing in the background seemed to fade, leaving only the sound of whispers and the faint clinking of silverware. Time felt heavy. Every second stretched as the kitchen doors remained closed. The woman grew restless, her heel tapping against the floor, her fingers tapping the table. She was used to instant responses, to being obeyed immediately. The wait made her frown. But she consoled herself with the thought that perhaps the owner was preparing to deal with the problem she had pointed out. Finally, the doors opened. The waitress stepped out, walking calmly, her expression composed. But she was not alone. Behind her, another figure followed. A tall man in a dark suit walked at her side, his presence strong but his expression gentle. Gasps spread across the restaurant and the whispers turned into a low murmur. Heads turned, eyes widened, and people straightened in their chairs. The woman's eyes lit up instantly. She leaned forward, convinced this was the owner she had demanded to see. She imagined him bowing, apologizing, and offering her a free meal for her trouble. She imagined victory. The waitress stopped at her table, and the man stood beside her. For a long moment, the waitress looked at the affluent woman with calm, steady eyes. And then she spoke, her voice clear, steady, and polite. "Ma'am, this is the owner of the restaurant." The woman's smile widened smugly. Finally, she said, "Now, sir, I need to tell you about the disgraceful," but before she could finish, the owner raised his hand gently. His eyes didn't move to her. Instead, he looked at the waitress with respect and said, "Thank you for bringing me out. But why did you call me? You're the one who should handle this. After all, this place exists because of you." The woman froze, her words caught in her throat. Her smile vanished, her confident posture collapsed. "What? What do you mean?" she asked, her voice suddenly small. The owner turned to her with a calm expression. "Ma'am, perhaps you don't realize. You asked for the owner. Well, here she is. This young woman you insulted, she's not just a waitress. She's the founder and owner of this restaurant." The room erupted into whispers and gasps. People leaned forward, their eyes wide, their mouths slightly open. The truth had finally begun to surface, and the balance of power shifted instantly. The affluent woman, once so proud, sat frozen in her chair. Her hand tightened around her handbag, her eyes wide in disbelief. Around her, the other guests watched closely, some with satisfaction, others with quiet pride. The turning point had come, and nothing would ever be the same again. The room was silent, almost unnaturally so. The clinking of forks, the soft music, even the whispers had stopped. Every eye was fixed on the table near the window, where the proud woman sat frozen in disbelief. She blinked rapidly, her lips parting as if to speak, but no sound came out. The waitress stood tall, her calm smile unchanged. She wasn't flaunting victory. She wasn't even angry. She simply looked at the woman with quiet dignity, as if the insults from earlier no longer mattered. Her presence, once invisible to the woman, now seemed larger than life. The owner at her side folded his hands in front of him and spoke gently. "This restaurant is not just mine. It was built by her. She is the reason this place exists. Years ago, when this street was nothing more than a forgotten corner of the city, she worked day and night to turn it into what you see now. She is not just a waitress. She is the heart of this restaurant." Gasps filled the air again, louder this time. People whispered urgently, but their voices carried pride and admiration. An elderly man at a nearby table leaned forward and said to his wife, "I knew it. I always suspected she was more than just staff. The way she worked, you could see she cared like an owner." The affluent woman's face turned pale. Her fingers trembled as they clutched her handbag. She shook her head slowly, refusing to believe it. No, that's not possible. She's just her words caught in her throat. The waitress stepped closer, her voice steady, carrying no bitterness. "Yes, ma'am. I do serve tables. I greet customers. I carry plates. Because this restaurant is more than a business to meet, is my dream. I worked in kitchens. I cleaned floors. I saved every coin I could until I opened these doors. And even today, I still serve. Not because I have to, but because I choose to. Respect for customers is at the heart of this place. Every person who walks in here deserves kindness. Even you." The woman's jaw dropped. Her eyes darted toward the other guests, searching for support, but all she found were stares filled with judgment. No one pitied her. No one defended her. She realized, with a sinking heart, that she was alone. The whispers around the room grew bolder. She insulted the owner. Imagine mocking her own hostess. Unbelievable. The arrogance. The affluent woman's pride, once so unshakable, began to crumble like glass. Her cheeks flushed red, her eyes watered, and for the first time since she entered the restaurant, she looked small. Very small. The waitress didn't smirk. She didn't mock. She simply placed her hands gently on the table, leaning slightly forward, and said in a soft but firm voice, "Ma'am, wealth and titles do not make anyone greater. How we treat others, that is what defines us." The words struck like a hammer in the silence. They carried no hatred, only truth. And somehow, that truth hurt more than any insult could have. The affluent woman opened her mouth again, perhaps to defend herself, perhaps to apologize, but no words came. Her throat tightened, her chest felt heavy, and the room seemed to close in around her. She could feel dozens of eyes piercing into her pride. Stripping away the mask she had worn so confidently, finally she lowered her gaze. Her shoulders sagged. Her arrogance drained away, leaving behind nothing but shame. She stared at the table, unable to look at the waitress, unable to face the crowd of witnesses who had seen her downfall. The little boy from earlier tugged on his mother's sleeve and whispered, loudly enough for others to hear, "She was mean, and now she's embarrassed." The innocent honesty brought a ripple of quiet chuckles through the room. The woman's face turned crimson. The waitress, however, did not linger. She straightened, gave a polite nod, and stepped back. "Your food will be served shortly," she said calmly, as though nothing extraordinary had happened. But everyone in the room knew it had. The owner gave the woman one last look, not harsh, not cruel, but disappointed. "You asked for the owner, ma'am," he said quietly, "and you found her. I hope you remember this moment." With that, he turned and walked back toward the kitchen, leaving the woman alone with her shattered pride. The affluent woman sat still, her hand trembling as she reached for her glass of water. She tried to sip, but her lips quivered, and the glass shook. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't in control. She wasn't admired. She wasn't powerful. She was exposed. The rest of the restaurant slowly returned to life. Conversations resumed, forks clinked, glasses touched. But the atmosphere was different now. There was a quiet respect lingering in the air for the waitress, for her dignity, and for the lesson everyone had just witnessed as the waitress continued serving other tables. Her smile unchanged, many customers greeted her warmly, some even nodding with admiration. They saw her not as a server anymore, but as a symbol of strength and humility. Meanwhile, the affluent woman sat frozen, her mind replaying every cruel word she had spoken earlier. Each insult echoed now like a heavy stone in her chest, and with every echo, her shame deepened. She had come into the restaurant to display her wealth and power. But what she had received instead was a lesson that would haunt her far longer than any meal could satisfy. The room still buzzed with whispers. But at the table near the window, time seemed to stop. The affluent woman sat perfectly still, her eyes wide, her lips trembling. Her fingers gripped her glass of water so tightly that tiny ripples shook inside it. She had demanded to see the owner, ready to humiliate the waitress. But instead, the truth had humiliated her. She could not speak. Her throat felt dry. Her heart pounded in her chest. She had built her life on the belief that money made her powerful, that her status gave her the right to look down on others. But now, with dozens of eyes staring at her, all of that power melted away. Her body felt cold, her face burned hot, and for the first time in years, she felt smaller than everyone around her. The other guests did not look away. They weren't cruel, but their silence weighed heavily on her. It was as if the entire restaurant had become a mirror, showing her exactly who she was, arrogant, shallow, and unkind. Every whisper that floated through the room felt like an arrow piercing her pride. She insulted the owner. Someone whispered. "How embarrassing," another said. "Money doesn't buy class," a third voice added. The woman's hands shook. She wanted to stand, to walk out, to escape the stairs. But her legs felt heavy, frozen to the floor. Her body refused to move, as though shame had locked her in place. Across the room, the little boy who had noticed her cruelty earlier pointed at her and whispered to his father. She looked scared now. The father nodded quietly and replied, "She should be. That's what happens when you treat people badly." The boy's innocent observation cut through her heart more than any adult's judgment could. The waitress, however, continued her work. She served other tables with grace, offering the same polite smile to every customer. She did not gloat, did not smirk, did not look back at the woman with revenge in her eyes. And that, more than anything, made the woman freeze even more. Her arrogance had been met not with cruelty, but with dignity. And dignity always won. The woman's mind raced. She replayed every word she had spoken earlier. Small life, not worthy, doesn't deserve respect. Each insult echoed in her memory, but now it sounded ridiculous, shameful, childish. How could she have mocked someone who built something so beautiful? How could she have laughed at a woman who had turned nothing into something admired by all? She lowered her gaze, staring at the tablecloth. Her reflection in the polished glass of water looked different. Not beautiful, not admired. It looked broken. The silence at her table was unbearable. She reached for her phone, pretending to check a message, but her hands shook so much that she nearly dropped it. Her face burned with humiliation. For years, she had walked into restaurants expecting admiration. But today, she was the one being judged. A couple at a nearby table exchanged a smile. Not out of cruelty, but satisfaction. She needed this, the woman whispered to her partner. People like her never learn until life teaches them the hard way. The affluent woman finally tried to speak. She cleared her throat softly, but her voice cracked. I didn't know, she whispered to herself. No one answered. No one comforted her. The weight of her own actions pressed down harder than anyone's words could. She looked toward the waitress again. The young woman was across the room now, refilling glasses at another table, laughing gently at a customer's joke. She looked radiant, calm, respected. The affluent woman realized that real power wasn't in diamonds or expensive clothes. Real power was in the respect and love people gave you, not because they feared you, but because you treated them well. Her chest tightened. She wanted to apologize, but the words refused to form. Her lips trembled, her throat burned, and tears threatened to rise. But she couldn't cry here, not in front of all these strangers, not in front of the very woman she had mocked. So she froze. She sat stiff in her chair, her pride shattered, her voice gone. Her body was there, but her spirit felt crushed under the weight of shame. She had entered the restaurant believing she was above everyone. Now she sat at the very bottom, lower than she had ever imagined. The waitress finally glanced in her direction. Their eyes met for the briefest second. The waitress's expression was not angry, not smug, it was kind, almost forgiving. That kindness was unbearable. The woman quickly looked down again, unable to meet those eyes. Around her, life in the restaurant moved on. Glasses clinked, people ate, conversations grew louder again. But at her table, everything was frozen. She was frozen. The wealthy clothes, the jewels, the handbag, all of it meant nothing now. She was just a woman, broken by her own arrogance, humbled by someone she thought was beneath her, and deep down she knew this moment would never leave her. She would remember it every time she looked at a waitress, every time she entered a restaurant, every time she thought of wealth and power. This was the day life had shown her a mirror. This was the freeze. The restaurant had slowly returned to its rhythm. Plates clinked, conversations flowed again, and the soft background music filled the air. But at one table by the window, a different kind of silence remained. The affluent woman sat motionless, staring at the half-empty glass in front of her. Her face pale, her lips pressed together. She was no longer the center of attention she had imagined herself to be. She was no longer admired, no longer feared. She was simply quiet. The waitress, meanwhile, continued her work with the same calm grace. She moved from table to table, offering smiles, refilling glasses, and checking if guests were satisfied. To her, this moment was not about revenge. It was not about proving superiority. It was simply another opportunity to show that respect and kindness mattered always. But for the woman, every movement of the waitress felt like a lesson carved into her soul. She had insulted her, mocked her, treated her like nothing. Yet here she was, serving with dignity, treating even her insulter with the same patience she gave to everyone else. The woman lowered her head, unable to bear it any longer. A part of her wanted to stand and run out to escape the humiliation. But another part, the part she had ignored for years, told her to stay, to face the truth. When the waitress returned to her table with the meal, she placed the plate gently in front of the woman and said softly, "Here is your order, ma'am. I hope you enjoy it." The woman looked up, her eyes wet. For the first time, her voice trembled. Why are you still kind to me? After everything I said, after how I treated you, why?" The waitress paused, her expression calm, but her eyes kind. "Because, ma'am," she replied, "if I answer cruelty with cruelty, then I become no different than the people who hurt me. Respect is not something I give only to those who deserve. It is something I give because it defines who I am." The words struck deep. The woman felt a lump in her throat. Her eyes blurred as tears threatened to fall. She tried to speak, but her voice broke. At last, she managed a whisper. "I'm sorry." It was not loud, not strong. But it was real. And for her, it was the hardest word she had ever spoken. The waitress gave a small nod. She didn't smile triumphantly, didn't linger. She simply acknowledged the apology with quiet grace and walked away, returning to her duties as if nothing had happened. But for the woman, everything had changed. Around the room, guests began to nod in approval. Some even clapped softly, not for the woman, but for the dignity of the waitress. The elderly couple smiled warmly at each other. The father, who had been teaching his son about respect, whispered, "Remember this, son. This is how life teaches us. Never forget it." The boy nodded solemnly, his young mind forever marked by the scene. The affluent woman sat in silence, her meal untouched. Her appetite was gone, replaced by reflection. She realized that her jewels, her coat, her expensive bagal, the things she once thought gave her worth, meant nothing in this moment. Respect couldn't be bought. Kindness couldn't be forced. Power wasn't in wealth. It was in how you treated people. She thought back to her own life, how many waiters, drivers, and clerks she had mocked over the years, believing she was above them. How many times had she laughed at people who had less? And now, in front of strangers, she had been humbled by the very person she had tried to crush. The freeze she felt earlier was beginning to melt, but not into pride. It melted into realization, into shame, and into the faint hope that maybe she could change. As the meal ended, she stood slowly, her hands trembling. She reached into her handbag and pulled out her wallet. For a moment, she hesitated, then placed a large tip on the table. But this time, it wasn't out of arrogance. It wasn't to show off wealth. It was a small, stumbling attempt at respect. She looked toward the waitress, who was busy serving another table. Her lips parted as if to call her name, but she stopped. She realized that no amount of words could undo the damage in a single night. Change would not come with one apology or with one tip. Change would have to come from within, slowly, over time. So she walked out quietly, her heels clicking against the marble floor. But this time there was no arrogance in her steps. No pride, no show. Just a woman carrying the weight of a lesson she would never forget. Outside, the cool evening air brushed against her face. She took a deep breath, the first honest one she had taken all day. She knew she would never see herself or others the same way again. Inside the restaurant, life carried on. The waitress continued her duties, respected and admired, the true symbol of what dignity looked like. And those who witnessed the moment carried the story with them too. A reminder that arrogance can fall in seconds. But kindness lasts forever, because, in the end, the greatest lesson was simple. Money fades, but respect remains. Status is temporary, but humanity is eternal.